Are we going to see a Palestinian voice on stage at this DNC?
The whole point of any of this, it's about being able to show there is room in the party for us too.
At the end of the day, Mehdi, who is our most important other? It's our Palestinian cousins. This thing has been going on for decades, for generations.
Party platform stated that the Democratic Party values Palestinian and Israeli lives equally. How did they signal that this week?
If I texted the WhatsApp groups that I'm in right now and I said, I need you to vote for Kamala Harris after what just happened this week, they're literally going to tell me I have no shame.
As a representative, elected representative, to I'm sure many Palestinian-Americans who come up to you and say, what are you doing in that party?
Yeah, I really thought I could take something back after this week. And now I don't know what I'm going to say to them.
Welcome to a very special episode of Mehdi Unfiltered. I'm Mehdi Hassan. We're here at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Actually, we're around the corner from the convention center at a brand new Palestinian-American owned cafe here in Chicago called OUD Coffee and Cafe. It's amazing. I urge you to check it out if you are in town. We're better to discuss the Democrats and the uncommitted movement than here, the pro-Palestine, anti-war, uncommitted movement, which secured more than 700,000 votes in the Democratic Party primaries earlier this year, more than 100,000 in Michigan alone, and has sent 30 delegates from 8 states to the DNC, and yet none of them have been up on the DNC stage. We haven't heard from an uncommitted speaker. We haven't heard from a Palestinian speaker. So who better to discuss all of this than with my special panel tonight. Layla Elabed is one of the founders of the National Uncommitted Movement from Dearborn, Michigan, longtime community organizer. Ruwa Romman is a Democratic state representative from Georgia, from Atlanta, the first Palestinian-American, first Muslim American woman elected to the Georgia House of Representatives. And Andy Levin, former 2-term Democratic congressman from Michigan, a progressive, I should add, a Jewish critic of Israel who locked horns, I think, had a good fight with AIPAC in the past. Brilliant panel here to talk about a very important subject. Here we are at the DNC in Chicago, Wednesday, penultimate night. Layla, are we going to see uncommitted on stage? Have a speaker? Are we going to see a Palestinian voice on stage at this DNC?
Well, in the most latest update that we've had, literally moments ago, we received an answer to our demand to have a Palestinian speaker or have a speaker that can provide that very human impact testimony of our U.S. policy decisions. We demanded that the DNC allow Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan to fulfill that role. We have asked the DNC to allow Palestinian electeds to fulfill that role. People like Ruwa and Abdel Nasser Rashid, right here from Chicago, elected within their own party, Palestinian elected with their own party. And we've just heard word that the answer is no. That
the DNC have said officially no.
Officially, the answer is no.
Was there a chance before? Was there a negotiation underway?
We thought we had been doing those negotiations for the last several days. We were being told, it's a good thing. There's not a no answer. There's not a yes answer. Keep giving us names. Keep giving us names. We have given them names of electeds. We have given them names of Palestinian-Americans who have family in Gaza. We have given them names of Palestinian-Americans who have lost family members in Gaza, all to come to this moment of like, no, it's not going to happen.
And you mentioned one of the people you had suggested was Ruwa Romman, who's Georgia State Representative. You are Palestinian-American. What does it feel to you tonight to see no Palestinian-American on stage at the DNC in the midst of this brutal assault? People are still being killed even as the DNC is going on. We had an Israeli hostage member's family on stage, which I think we all support. We all want the hostages released from Gaza, but no space for a Palestinian-American voice such as yourself. You're an elected Democratic lawmaker. You're not some outsider. You're not an agitator. You're a lawmaker.
Yeah, I'm very much a rule follower, thanks to my mom. She's really drilled it into me, which has made it very, trying to keep the straight and narrow.
We're not going to see you rush the stage then.
Unfortunately, I don't think I have that kind of bravery. But it is definitely very disappointing because one, I want to be very clear. I'm so honored that you all even put me on that list. I mean, I took that very, very seriously. But at the same time, I don't think people understand the reason we are here. The whole point of any of this, it's not about who is on that stage. It's about being able to show there is room in the party for us too. We have heard from Republicans this week. We have heard from so many different stakeholders. Our tent has now become massive, including, by the way, Republicans from my state. And to think that those Republicans are allowed a bigger platform in my own party than me as an elected official, who all I want to talk about is our stories, about why we are there, and the vision and the future that we think we can reach, the promise that the Democratic Party can reach in this historic moment. And instead we're being told, once again, no.
Andy, you were a member of Congress for 2 terms. You've been in the Democratic Party for a long time. Why? What do you think is the reasoning in the DNC and the Harris campaign? Are they just worried about this issue being in prime time?
You know, I don't really know, Mehdi, but I'm disappointed because I think, look at, if you saw Bernie Sanders' speech, the biggest, but he didn't just say end the horrifying war in Gaza. It was the biggest applause line in his speech. You know, the Democratic base, Jewish, Arab American, you know, African American, all of our amazing rainbow, like, you know, we're talking about the tent. Yes. Really, there's a strong feeling across all the different, you know, parts of our party that we need a real ceasefire to end this horrifying violence. And let me just say it. Before we came, I was able to see the hostage parents. You know, they're from Chicago. I didn't know anything about it before I saw them. So moved. Everybody in that hall is crying. I was super moved by it. You know, I think the Democratic Party has to talk about the fact that we had a way better chance of getting more hostages out alive by not having this terrible war. The Israeli Defense Forces have said that some of these hostages seem to have likely been killed when the IDF, blew up tunnels.
Just this week, 5 of the 6 bodies that were brought back apparently allegedly killed by the IDF.
Right. So, you know, it wasn't even a good strategy for that. Why can't we talk about these things? But look, I also am a little bit, you know, I have 2 really different perspectives on this. One is just as a person, a Jew of faith who takes my faith seriously, you know, the Torah says, our Bible says 36 times some version, a mitzvah, a requirement, what we need to do, that, you know, love the stranger as yourself, the other. There's different formulations, right? 36 is a significant number for us. 18, you know, it's a double high. You know, there's a lot to it. Who is the most important? At the end of the day, Mehdi, who is our most important other? It's our Palestinian cousins. This thing has been going on for decades, for generations, and I believe Kamala Harris can change course and face it. But and so I'm sure we'll talk about policy too. Yeah. But I do think it was if this is the decision, I think it's a mistake. Not look at I just met Ruwa, like this amazing state legislator from Georgia. And I guess the Uncommitted Movement, let her speak. Yeah. The Uncommitted Movement, I guess, gave a lot of options. You know, that Dr. Tanya, that was the same doctor on our panel on Monday. Oh my goodness.
She was on Christian Amanpour's CNN show. But good enough for CNN, but not the DNC.
She is so compelling and she's totally non-political.
Yes.
You know, so anyway, it's disappointing to me.
So let me ask you this, you actually met with Kamala Harris briefly in a kind of rope line before the rally in Michigan about, what was it now, 10 days there? I can't keep track of days anymore. I just got to ask you, as a Palestinian on this panel with Ruwa, there's a whole debate about Palestinian invisibility. And Ta-Nehisi Coates, one of the great writers of our time, has just written a piece for Vanity Fair.
Yeah, who I met yesterday.
And he's saying very openly that there's no Palestinians on stage because they don't want to hear from them, they don't want to see them, they're very uncomfortable, they being the party leadership. How do you feel as a Palestinian within this movement, someone who got up close personally with the vice president, who's someone who clearly has empathy for people in trouble, is a woman of color? How did you feel, I wonder, when you met with her? When
I met with her, I felt that her empathy and her compassion towards me was very authentic and genuine. Yeah. And it was in a very emotional moment for me to sit there and face Vice President Kamala Harris and tell her that Michigan voters want to be able to vote for her, but we can't do that with a policy that doesn't save the lives of people we love, the lives of Palestinians who are the very reflection of our own community here in the United States. These are people that share the same names of my own children.
Yes.
And although she was very compassionate, very genuine, she listened to what I had to say. I told her about the tens to hundreds of family members that my community members are losing each day in Gaza because of our tax dollars. And she said it's horrific. And I asked her, will you meet with us to discuss an arms embargo? And she said she would meet with us. She didn't say she would, agree to an arms embargo.
And her advisors very quickly came out the next day and said she doesn't support arms embargo.
And we know that. That's why we said we want to discuss with you an arms embargo, because we know that is not the current policy. But the current policy right now does not actually get us a ceasefire.
So you are in the Uncommitted Movement. You are here at the DNC pressuring from within. It's insider-outsider strategy, as the phrase goes. Ruwa, you are a member of the House of Representatives. You're a Democratic lawmaker. What do you both say? What do you say as a representative, elected representative, to, I'm sure, many Palestinian-Americans who come up to you and say, what are you doing in that party? We're invisible to that party. We're not represented. They don't care about us. What do you say to them?
I'm going to be honest with you. I really thought I could take something back after this week. Yeah. And now I don't know what I'm going to say to them. Yeah. I really don't. Because, none of us expect to change 80 years worth of policy, in the course of a single election cycle. That is absolutely not the, current ask. That is not what is being demanded. What is being demanded at the most basic fundamental level is that for those of us who have given so much for this party, because again, I've been an organizer for 10 years, 8 years longer than I've been an elected official. I have knocked doors. I personally knocked doors for President Biden in Forsyth County in the cold on my own, because I firmly believe that we could not have Trump again. Yeah. I am somebody who's turned out, at this point, tens of thousands of voters for the party. I'm in a swing state, and I've done it consistently. And when somebody tells me, what are you doing in that party? I used to be able to say, this is the only party, the only one that at least strives to do the right thing. No, but there is no singular perfect party. But our tent is big enough that I can see myself in it, and that it matches my values of striving to be the best that we can be.
You won't see yourself on stage now.
And to be clear, again, it's not about me, just a singular
like
Palestinian, somebody who shares who we are.
I just want to broaden it past, just because you mentioned your state, Georgia, and I was going to get into it later, but you mentioned it now. This idea of being a swing state, when we talk about swing states, and I want to come back to Michigan, Andy, you mentioned it earlier, obviously we talk about Arab Americans in Michigan, but this is way beyond Arab Americans. You're in Georgia, where we know 11,000 votes.
780.
Split. We know because Donald Trump called up and said, find me those votes. And yet, I believe 6,000 uncommitted, or I think it's called, what was it called in Georgia? It was a different name.
Leave it blank.
Leave it blank. 6,000 people left it blank in the primaries. That number may be bigger today, given what's happened over the last few months. And the New York Times reported that black pastors in Georgia were leading the movement against this genocide and calling for a ceasefire. This is not just about Arab Americans in the tent. This is, as Andy mentioned earlier, young people, black people, Jewish people.
Yeah, I mean, to be very clear, our multi-faith, multi-racial, multi-generational coalition that has grown on this in Georgia is the reason I'm still alive today. I could not bear the weight of everything that has happened without them. What we saw in Georgia truly was the future of this country. And to see that be ignored, particularly when the stakes are so high, and I want to be clear, me as an elected official, I care about my constituents. I want to keep them safe as much as humanly possible. And I'm Palestinian, and now I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place of, what do I do ahead of November? How can I turn out my community, who, by the way, there's 76,000 registered Muslims in the state of Georgia. There are 55,000 Arabs, and we're not really sure how many of those are registered to vote, but those are still way larger than the margin of victory for President Biden. And I'm concerned, and the only reason I'm here, the only reason any of us are trying this hard is because we want to be able to deliver those votes come November.
Andy, I spoke to someone in the DNC a few months ago, and I said, what about Michigan? Aren't you worried? This is when Biden was still the candidate. Aren't you worried about Michigan? And they said, no, we think we can win Michigan with suburban women on abortion and auto workers and labor. We don't need Arab Americans or young people. What's your reaction to that?
You know, I for one thing, there's so many Arab Americans are auto workers.
Yes.
I just have to say, thousands and thousands. We have 300,000 Middle East, North African people. We're beyond our Arab American population. We're a big Muslim state of, other black Muslims, South Asian Muslims, right? You mentioned the black pastors, bishops of the AME Church, right, called out this issue.
Yes.
Thousands of black pastors around the country. So it's an issue that cuts across the progressive base, the base of the Democratic Party in Michigan. And I particularly want to call out one thing about Michigan that we're super proud of. We have done, and we're recognized for this. The Roosevelt Institute just put out a little report. Michigan's done the best of any state on what you might call democratic, with a small d, democratic hygiene. You know, same day, no vote registration, motor voter, no reason absentee, college students being able to vote where they are studying. You can register and vote right up till the polls close, on and on. From 2018 to 2022, Michigan increased its youth vote more than any other state. And in 2022, we had the highest vote rate of youth voting. And then, what are we going to squander all this? Because young people are so deeply into this issue. And you have to just, I don't think the people understand in the campaign or in the DNC. On a college campus in Michigan, since we're by far the most densely Arab American state, like if we're a bunch of sophomores in our dorm, or if we're a bunch of students in a frat or a sorority or in a dining hall, there are Palestinian-Americans in our friend groups. And let's say we're all students here. Let's say none of us are political, right? And a Palestinian-American friend runs in crying, what's the matter? 12 of my cousins were just wiped out. Their apartment block was imploded by a 2,000-pound bomb. We're all gonna start crying. We're all gonna start hugging. We're never gonna forget this moment for the rest of our lives. And this, all of a sudden, our parents are going to be like, what happened to you? You're all political. Because we're all part of that friend's cause. Because we can't stand for it. So look, I don't want Donald Trump anywhere near the White House ever again. I've said from the beginning of my support for these amazing young organizers like Layla, who created this, you know, Listen to Michigan movement that became the Uncommitted National Movement. I was going to vote for Biden. I'm definitely voting for Harris. But I want to help her win Michigan. You can't win the White House without winning Michigan because of the stupid electoral college, right? You need those Michigan's electoral college, 15 electoral college votes. And maybe you could win Michigan without, but any sensible organizer.
You don't want to be complacent with our stupid electoral college and Donald Trump neck and neck in the polls.
Yes.
Layla, let me ask you this. And I do want to come back to Michigan, and you're from Dearborn, I know. But just on the policy front, let's say we started this conversation talking about this kind of quote unquote breaking news this evening here on a Wednesday evening in Chicago that there isn't going to be a Palestinian voice on the DNC stage before it's over tomorrow night. But let's say they had put a Palestinian voice on stage. Let's say they had put Ruwa on stage and we heard a great speech and we heard Palestinian humanity expressed from the podium. But then the policy still didn't change. You'd still leave Chicago with Palestinians being killed with American bombs. And the policy that you are now calling for is some form of arms embargo, conditioning of aid. Kamala Harris's former national security advisor said on a panel a few days ago, there will be no conditioning of aid in her view. Phil Gordon, who's the current national security advisor to the vice president, put out a tweet the day after you met with Harris saying she doesn't support an arms embargo. So it's not looking good on the policy front. Or is there do you think there's some place for some movement at some point?
I do think, you know, in having a speaker on the stage of the Democratic National Convention was a demand that we had, a movement demand that we had of the DNC. It is not the demand of our movement overall, is just to have a speaker.
Yes, it was one.
But the party platform was revealed on Monday. And that party platform stated that the Democratic Party values Palestinian and Israeli lives equally. How did they signal that this week during the Democratic National Convention? Not having one Palestinian-American speaker.
And even though you guys turned up with 700,000 votes under your belt.
They've had
700,000 more than some of the pro-Harris Republicans.
Exactly. Not only they had Republicans speak on that stage, they even had Border Patrol officers speak on that stage. But they couldn't find one Palestinian to
But they
be
could
on
find, they just don't want to give them.
They just didn't want it.
You found them, one of them's right here.
It is almost like our tears, our pain, our suffering doesn't matter. You know, my sister Rashida often says that a Palestinian child's cries is no different than an Israeli child's cries. But what just happened this week and the fact that our request was denied signal to all of us that is not true, that they do not value our lives the same. And when it comes to policy, the least that we could do, this administration and Vice President Harris could do, is follow our own justice system.
Yeah.
Because right now we are violating, right now we are in violation of our own laws, Leahy law and international law.
Which says you can't use weapons, you can't provide weapons to where human rights violations are being documented. Let me ask you this, Andy, quick question on, Layla mentioned her sister Rashida, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, who isn't at the DNC this year. Let me ask you this question, Andy. The only Palestinian-American in Congress was censured by Congress in the midst of all this. Not the Republicans who said turn Gaza into a parking lot, who made genocidal statements about Palestinians, but the woman who said, I want everyone to be free. But she said, between the river and the sea, you're not allowed to say that. I got asked a question. You went up against AIPAC in your own race. You lost in 2022. Are we seeing any movement in terms of the Democrats in Congress changing their positions on Israel-Palestine, standing up to a pro-Israel lobby? I saw a speaker on stage, I can't remember who, on Monday or Tuesday night say, we took on the gun lobby and we beat them. And I think I tweeted, will we ever hear a Democrat say on a DNC stage, we took on the pro-Israel lobby and beat them? Will that day ever come?
Well, I think AIPAC is, becoming, it's completely lost its soul. I mean, and the Democratic Party faces an existential issue over this, not just because of this one issue, but because of what it means to let Republican billionaires come in and determine the outcomes of Democratic primaries, right? But I really, what Congress does on this matters a lot, but I think, and I was a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and I think the Article I body, Congress, which holds all the purse strings, including on all the foreign, spending we do on all military, humanitarian, everything. I think Congress needs to take its proper role on foreign policy in a stronger way. Like, we have these authorizations for use of military force from forever ago that we don't get rid of. All those should have a time limit and all that. But listen, I think in our tradition, even if we did that, the role of the president in foreign affairs is really strong. And so I want to keep the focus on Vice President Harris. And I'm not giving up.
What about Joe Biden? What's going on there? Well, the guy's not even running for re-election anymore.
Well, no. So that's an excellent point.
And he just signed off on, I think, $20 billion.
But I think that Vice President Harris is in a difficult position here, right? She's the vice president. He's the president. But she's who I'm focused on. I don't expect change from President Biden on this.
But Harris should distance herself from Biden?
Well,
because your senator in Michigan, Gary Peters, said recently at Politico that he thinks she holds different views. And when he was asked by the Politico reporter, should she make them clear, he said yes.
Yes, and Gary Peters is a really smart politician who's very careful, and what he says is very considered.
Agreed.
And he's in charge of the Senate, re-election effort to try to hold the majority, which is going to be super tough. So I think there's a significance there. What I really want to emphasize is, as disappointing as not having a speaker is, a Palestinian speaker on stage in prime time, which is very disappointing. To be honest, I'm much more focused on the policy.
Yes.
And the policy is most important. And I am not giving up at all. Look, she just became the nominee. This is crazy. She's filling out her team, right? I want to keep, our eyes on the prize of getting her to say things, as Senator Peters says, that if you have your own views, express them. And I think there's a lot of space for her to do this in a way that would make people in the community feel like, okay, I want to give her a chance. Very few people. Look, Muslims have fundamentalists just like Christians and Jews. So there's these people in Dearborn and every other part who are like, ban books and, no abortion ever. I mean, there are Muslims like that too. So they might vote, Arab American and otherwise. And by the way, in my re-election, when I was strongly supported by the Muslim community, this is something to pay attention to, because some of them would say, oh, you know, we're supporting you and stuff, but you have to do something to protect our children. I'm like, what? And then they would say, like, well, they can't be, you know, I don't want to get off track. But listen, she could say,
yes.
as Layla said, and when I'm president,
yes,
we're going to follow U.S. and international law.
Which is what Hubert Humphrey did in '68 to distance himself from LBJ on Vietnam.
He did.
Narrowed the gap in the polls. He did. In September '68, he finally disowned LBJ, but it was too late.
Too late.
And he lost by 0.7 percentage point.
Yes.
So we don't want to see that happen with Donald Trump benefiting. Ruwa, I want to come back to you on the convention. Before I do, just Layla, on that point about some people, you know, will never vote for. Of the uncommitted movement, like what proportion would say, you know what? We're not just trying to, you know, there was a whole punish Biden phrase. We're not just about punishing. We do want change. And if there is some kind of indication of change, we'll give her the benefit of the doubt.
There was just a poll that came out, I think it was an IMEU poll.
Yes, it was, YouGov poll, yeah.
Yes, that said that if Vice President Kamala Harris came out with a policy that saved lives right now, a form of an arms embargo,
yes,
that she would win those key swing states.
Yes. I think more than a third of voters
yes.
were more likely to vote for her.
Yes, more likely to vote for her.
Yeah.
And so these are folks who these are Democratic voters who don't want to see Trump elected, but want their children and their family members and their communities here and abroad to be protected. Because let's not ignore what has happened here in the last few months. It hasn't been just the rise of anti-Semitism, but there's been a rise in anti-Arab hate, Islamophobia, anti-Palestinian hate. Wadia El-Fayyoumi from Illinois was stabbed to death for being Palestinian. The 3 men from Vermont, one who's going to be paralyzed for the rest of his life.
Yes.
And the mother from Texas who literally had to save her children from being drowned by a racist.
That's a very good point.
And,
that all has to be part of this conversation.
And all of this has to be a part of this conversation.
On that note, we actually saw an act of violence against a Muslim woman in a headscarf here at the DNC this week. I don't know if you saw the video. There was a guy with a I love Joe Biden flagpole on tape on Monday night, I think it was, leant forward and hit a protester who was peacefully, quietly just unfurling a
delegate, Democratic, a Harris delegate.
Hit her on the head. I'm amazed that that person hasn't been found, hasn't been banned, hasn't been suspended, hasn't been asked to leave. I mean, we've just normalized Islamophobia and anti-Arab hate, as Layla pointed out. How is that? I can't imagine any other community, any other minority, religious or racial, that happening on camera, in prime time, in an arena, and there's no outcry, no condemnation from the DNC leadership, no punishment.
I mean, to be clear, I don't know who the delegate was that had the sign. I don't even think they may even know, but I do want to share this because I think this is the part that keeps getting missed in these viral videos and polarization, increased polarization. Because to Layla's point, the reason Uncommitted is so powerful is it showed, not just told, about what people were feeling when it came to the presidential cycle in a way that could not be spun away in key swing states. That's what makes this so powerful. And the reason we are worried, and to your point about the convention, is that, again, the biggest applause lines were when we heard about a ceasefire. If you walk through the halls of the convention, so many, I would say the majority of people are wearing kufiyas, are wearing uncommitted paraphernalia, they've got pins, they've got flags, I mean, I have never, ever, I'm 31 years old, I have never seen this kind of care for Palestinians in my entire life. And so the part that I don't understand is that we're allowing that image to take hold about the DNC when we literally have
base is on site.
Exactly, literally.
I was just on my way here from the United Center and someone stopped me and said, please keep speaking for Palestine, a delegate.
Exactly.
So then there's a disconnect, right? This is why American democracy is in trouble, where it's not just Palestine, there's multiple issues where the public are in one place and the elected representatives are in another, partly because of lobby groups, partly because of other interests. But you're optimistic, Andy. I get a sense from you that you're still optimistic.
Well, I think
hopeful. It's a different thing.
I tell you what. I think Ruwa and Layla are here, right? And I'm here. I was in the hall the last 2 nights. It's electric.
Yeah.
People are so excited. I'm so grateful to Joe Biden that he stepped aside after that disastrous debate. I think he did, you know, I have many problems with, especially about certain foreign policy things, but I was so proud to serve with him in the 117th Congress and all the legislation we passed on climate change, which is getting way too little attention here, climate change. and investing in America and blah blah blah. But to be a Palestinian American here, and all that electricity and excitement, and this first Indian American black woman president ever, you're not part of it.
Yeah,
you're somehow, why aren't we part of it? I think that's very upsetting to people, and I think a lot of delegates, the very people crying such real tears over, imagine the pain of a parent, with a 23-year-old son who's been, in captivity. That's a war crime, for 300, however many days. And then your pain isn't part of it too. And I don't understand how that helps the party. I don't think it helps the party.
I don't think it helps.
I think it's not a good idea.
Before we run out of time later, where does Uncommitted go from here, from Chicago?
We were really hoping to leave Chicago and be able to mobilize voters, especially in key swing states like Michigan, so we have that fighting chance in November. In all honesty, we will continue talking about the dangers of a Trump presidency because we know what that's going to mean, not just for us here that are organizing and advocating for human rights for Palestine, but we know how much worse it's going to be for Palestinians. We already know that Donald Trump uses Palestinian like it's an ethnic slur.
Yes.
We know that he has promised his mega donors to annex the West Bank, where my family is currently lives, to be part of Israel.
Jared's got his eyes on beachfront property in Gaza.
He literally, when he was during his administration, he moved the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a direct attack on Palestinian right to self-determination. And we know that he's already said in Project 2025 that the type of work that I'm doing, that the Uncommitted movement is doing, is going to be movements that are going to be criminalized. So we know how much worse it's going to be, not just for us, but the communities we love and care about.
But a lot of liberals in that convention center, a lot of blue, no matter who partisans will say, but you're to blame if he wins.
No.
That's what they'll say.
Asking our electeds and our candidates for presidency to listen to the core base of their voters, which 86% of Democratic voters want a permanent immediate ceasefire. And I think it's 53% want conditioning on funding to Israel. People do not want to see our tax dollars being used to kill innocent men, women, and children.
But at the end of the day, come November, Kamala Harris does not shift on this.
That is something that she has to answer to. Will
you vote for her in November if she doesn't shift?
Right now, I need to see a policy change, how she's going to protect people that I love and care about. And I cannot recommend a vote for her in this moment, now.
You're an activist and organizer.
Yeah, but I know how dangerous Trump is.
Ruwa's elected Democrat. And I asked you at the beginning, and I'll ask you again as we wrap up. Somebody comes to you and says, how are you voting? I'll follow your lead.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that I wish people followed my lead when it comes to voting. That's why we're here. That's why we are raising the alarms. I mean, we might be in two different places, but again, I'm an elected official. I am around a very different group of people, and so where my mind is very different. But I do know for a fact, if I texted the WhatsApp groups that I'm in right now, and I said, I need you to vote for Kamala Harris after what just happened this week, they're literally gonna tell me I have no shame. And the thing is, the point of this week was to try to reduce that anger. It was because
it would have been a very different WhatsApp conversation tomorrow night if you were coming off a stage having spoken about your grandfather.
But I want to make this note because I feel like nobody is talking about this. In 2016, a very sophisticated mis and disinformation campaign effectively suppressed the vote. There is the same kind of suppressive campaign happening right now online using this very issue because it is very real and it is very visceral and it is dividing our communities. And my worry isn't just for the election, it's what's going to happen after when our party is dependent on a broad and beautiful coalition.
The broad and beautiful coalition is still fighting to survive. I think we'll leave it on that note. Andy Levin, Ruwa, Romman, Layla Elabed, thank you all for coming here in Chicago. Thank you to the wonderful OUD Cafe for hosting us. Mehdi Unfiltered will be back next week. Please do tune in. Make sure you're subscribed to Zeteo. Thanks so much.